Hi, so this video is going to talk about grief, and I've done a video before, it's privated because I feel like now I'm better. And grief isn't easy to handle. It's not something, there's not a rule book, I know people say that there's like stages of grief and you go through that, but it's not that easy, and not everyone grieves the same way, and not everyone gets over a death easily, or there's just so many variables. It goes with personality, with culture. Like if death in your culture is something that's very celebrated and accepted and talked about, and it's death isn't the end but a new beginning, everything, there's so many variables that go into it. Like I personally really love cultures that embrace death, that just talk about it, that say it like it's just another level. It's like you're not gone, you're just kind of like evolving. And I remember, if there's only two deaths that have affected me that have really stayed with me, and that was one of a friend who he died in 2013. So it's been about 7 years, and it's still get really sad. It's still hard. When he died, I remember not. My brain couldn't understand it. He died. He was 18, and I just couldn't. My brain couldn't. It just couldn't compute. Like when someone's older and they die, you're like, okay, if they've been getting sick, and then they just, your brain starts to kind of like understand it and prepare itself. But when it's someone who is just out of the bloom, your brain just isn't equipped. You don't just day-to-day life, you don't just like train your brain to handle grief. You don't expect it. And so I remember when that happened, first I was angry, then guilt, then just denial. I didn't want to believe it. So logically I knew he was gone, but the other part of my brain was like, he's not gone. He's in New York. He's going, because we had just graduated. Like we graduated a week later. So I was like, no, he's out and he's studying abroad, and that's why I won't see him, because and I would picture him just in New York walking around, because I couldn't accept it. I couldn't. It was something that I remember the day of the funeral with the casket. I would look at it and I just couldn't. Even when the burial, and then the covering of when they put the stones and the dirt, whatever, brain just, it was short-circuiting. I just stood there, and I remember thinking, he's gonna be lonely. He's down there by himself. And even though, like, I know at that age I was 17, so I knew what death was. I knew that he was just a body. But the other part of me was like, he's still there. We're leaving and he's staying, and and then the years passed, and I remember thinking, he stopped at 18. He didn't get to experience his 20s. He didn't, 21. He didn't graduate. He stayed at in school. And I remember I ran into his dad once, and just the look in his eyes. I mean, you don't even have to put your perspective into his to know that. Imagine you seeing, kids who went to the same class as your son growing up, and your son didn't. And I remember people kind of forget, people who who aren't close or didn't know the deceased, they just are like, oh, he died, okay. And if they see you like in 6 months, they expect you to be over it, because they're just like, well, I'm over it. But you can't just put a timeline. You can't just put like oh, this is when things are gonna be better. Like for me, it wasn't. It's been 7 years, and I still cry. I still mourn. I still think about him. Of course, not every day. I'm not sad every day. Just sometimes it hits me. Sometimes I'll just be there and I'll be like, I really wish he was here. And the cold hard truth, it doesn't matter how much you pray, how much, you wish, and how much you just could go back into the past and just do something. You can't change it, and that's the truly heartbreaking thing, because they're not going to be here. They're not here. And you are. And you can't talk to them. And now it's been 7 years. I remember his face. I remember his mannerisms. But I can barely remember his voice. I try to think. His voice just, I can barely remember how he would talk, his laugh. And maybe in another 10 years down the line, I'll forget his mannerisms, and, and the second death that really hit me was my grandmother. My grandmother was sick, so we knew that, it was going to happen, but same thing. I remember when, my grandmother was being lowered, her casket was being lowered, I was thinking, she's going to be lonely. No one's going to be there, And I remember she suffered from memory issues, but she was always so sweet, always so warm, and we would go visit her, and she would always be like, okay, did you eat? Did you have your drinks? She was just, I remember, I'd always be like, just, if she wants to have champagne, just give her champagne. She's 90, and they'd be like, no, and I'm like, guys, she's old, let her enjoy things. I really wish she would have been able to enjoy life a little bit more. I mean, at least she had peace at the end. She didn't have people bothering her, but even in that case, where my grandmother was someone who was sick, and her health was deteriorating, it still stung. My brain still couldn't process it, and still, even though I didn't do the same thing of thinking, oh, she's alive somewhere, because I know she wasn't, it still did the thing of, I was 20, I think, when she died. Yeah, I was 20. I think I was 20. And 20 or 19, I don't remember. And I remember I was, I was, grown up. And I still thought she was going to be alone, even though I knew that she wasn't there. That was a body, her soul, her being, whatever you want to believe in, wasn't there. But it's still, I was sad because she was going to be lonely. She was going to be by herself. And so I think, obviously, religion helps a lot of people, It helps with people knowing where we go in the afterlife, what happens to us. I like to believe that our souls choose where to go, choose what to do. If they want to stay around and just chill on earth and be like, I'm going to just see what happens. Or if they're like, you know what, I'm ready, I'm going to go and, go into another body. And because I do think we do have past lives and we do live various lives. And I don't think death is the end of it. It's incredibly scary because I think, obviously, when we die, that chapter of our life is over. We start over. People that we knew, we won't know. And that's terrifying, And one thing is, I'm Mexican, so my mom, even when I was young, she would tell me about Dia de los Muertos. Obviously, Coco, the movie, added to that as well. But even before, I was afraid of people being forgotten. My friend, I was like, what if he gets sad that people forget about him? What if you do, feel it? And so I always just think about him and mention him and, keep him alive some way. And even my grandmother, I'm like, oh, look, I found these pictures of grandma, or grandma used to do this. And I think it also helps you, and I think it also kind of, I know some people are mean, and people don't respect how their people deal with grief or mourning or their beliefs. For example, after my grandma passed, she had this perfume, and I would smell it just randomly, and it wasn't a person passes, I smell the perfume, and I'm like, oh my god, it's my grandma. No, there wasn't people around, and I would smell the perfume, and then it would go away. And to me, that was my grandma. I was at an internship in another country, and I was walking towards the bus, and I was the only one because it was really early in the morning, and I smelled the perfume. And at the same internship at night, I smelled it as well when I was going to the bus. So to me, it was my grandmother just making sure that I was okay. And when he passed away in my dreams, years later, he would just appear and he would just be like, I'm okay, or you're okay. And I knew that he didn't belong in my dreams because it wasn't like the other people who were like characters. He was different. And I knew he didn't belong. And to me, that's reassuring. And I know that there's people who are, a bit mean, who if I were to tell this, they'd be like, oh, it's just, your brain trying to make it feel better or, stuff like that. But I do think there's more than we know. That's very obvious. But I think death isn't as bleak as people want it to be, as, oh, you just died and that's it and you're gone. I don't think that's true. I don't think that there's ghosts in that sense of like, oh, you're stuck here forever. No. I think you can pick, what happens, and you can choose to stay and watch out for your loved ones, or whenever you're ready and go and feel like, oh, they're in good hands. Death isn't fair. Death doesn't wait. Doesn't, say, okay, you guys you're 90, you're 98, okay, time to go. No. I used to be afraid of death. I used to think death was malicious, in a sense, but death is just impartial. He's just waiting. He's just there. He's not malicious. That's how I thought. He's not there being like, I love how this started out, me talking about grieving to me talking about death. Same thing, but focusing back on grief. When you're grieving, you are allowed to grieve however you want to, and for however long you want to. Please be careful with the way you grieve. I know some people go to substances, drugs, alcohol. I would not recommend that, but sometimes we do things when we're most in pain, but cry all you want. I know a lot of people, I'm very verbal about letting people mourn. People are like, oh, well, their husband died like a year ago, why are they still sad? Because they are. They're allowed to try to live life again and cry sometimes. There was someone I knew who would have the ashes of the loved one in their living room, and they would talk to the ashes, and people were like, what? And I'd be like, I don't see, like, when I was a child, when my cat, who I grew up with, that cat, that was my best friend, she passed away from old age, and so they burned her ashes. She was a little box of ashes, and I would talk to her, and I would tell her what I did in school, and that's how you mourn. That's how it is, and people let go at different speeds. Some people, just by, having something of their sentimental value and throwing in the river, that's how they let go. Other people don't let go that easily, and it can take a while. And I think as long as you try to continue living, then that's okay. We all have those bad days, and what I mean by that is, like, if you, talk to them. Let's say you talk to them. You're in an apartment and you think that they're near you, or you're, walking towards your job. Talk to them. Put on your headphones. Make it seem like you're calling someone. But keep on living. Keep on going forward. Don't stay at home. Don't stay locked away. You can still mourn outside. You can still mourn with others around you. And if you are friends with someone who's mourning, just be patient. Don't call them words. Don't belittle them. Don't tell them that they're being dramatic or exaggerating or that they're being a crybaby. Because people's impact, you can't, there's just some people you just can't measure how much they've touched your soul. You know, some people are in that soul and they're in it for a while, and you just can't, it's not a simple, like, I'll go to sleep and in the morning everything will be okay type of thing. But I thought this was appropriate considering a lot of things that are happening in the world, that your loved ones who've left, they're not gone. They're there. They're with you. And if you have religion on your side in the sense of you find peace in that, then find peace in that. If you find peace in that your loved one went to a better place, then as well. Just be respectful of what people think and people believe in and how people deal with death and mourn death and interact with those who have passed. You know, it's not easy. We, as the humans race, death is one of those enigmas that we just don't know, because the majority of people who have died, actually died, don't come back. I mean, people have died and they come back to life, you know, died for a minute and they don't really know what happened. Some people think that they're in a waiting room, or who knows. But just be patient. And I think this applies to every party. To the person who's mourning, to the person who's you know, interacting with someone who's mourning. Just be patient. There'll be a day when you'll wake up and it won't hurt that much. And the next day you'll wake up, and then a couple days later, or a couple months later, you'll wake up and it'll hurt less and less, till one day you think about them and all you'll feel is happiness. A little bit of sadness, but mostly happiness. And when that day comes, it's gonna be nice.